Hello and welcome to Minidisc TV. My name is Lachlan and I work here at Minidisc.
And my name's Eric and I also work here at Minidisc.
And today we're going to be talking about the Sennheiser HD820. And I really wanted to get Eric in on this discussion because he is a very happy owner of the Sennheiser HD800S. Whereas I personally am not the biggest fan of the HD800 series up till now. So now that the 820 has come out, we've actually arrived at interestingly different opinions on the 820, which is what we're going to get into with this video. But first, for context, I was going to ask Eric, tell us a little bit about your relationship with the HD800 and some of the other cans that you have at home at the moment.
So the 800S is my go-to sort of headphone. I use it sort of to relax to a lot of music at the end of the day. I use it to pump myself up while I study. It's a multi-purpose can, honestly, but it's such a great detailed can with such a wide soundstage. It really just brings you into the music in sort of a very unique way. There isn't really anything else in the market apart from the 800 series that does it. And so what the S does over the 800, the standard 800, is kind of make it a bit more musical rather than analytical. So when the 820 came out, it was one of those things I was really looking forward to getting my hands on and giving a quick listen to, and really just putting it through its paces just so I could figure out if this is really all it's sort of been hyped up to be.
Sure. It's interesting because I'm sort of from the opposite perspective where I listened to the 800S and the 800, and as you say, the 800S was to my ears a bit more musical, a bit more warm, but at the end of the day, it's a headphone that I respect as a sort of listening instrument, but I've never been able to really sort of emotionally engage with the sound because it sounds a bit too diffuse, a bit too kind of clinical for me. So I was kind of keen to hear the 820 because I was wondering, by switching to closed back, did Sennheiser get closer to the kind of emotional sound that I want? And to give you an idea, right now at home I'm using Audio-Technica R70Xs and Audeze LCD2Cs. So those are really quite thick.
It's much more of a thinner sounding headphone.
Right, yeah.
So going from something like the LCD2C or any of the planar magnetic sort of headphones and coming to this, it's a completely different experience. So where does the 820 sit?
So the 820 for me has been a really positive thing. It's still not like a headphone for bass heads. It's still not like an Audeze in terms of the punch and the slam of that bass, but it is a richer sounding headphone than the HD800 and the HD800S, and it softens the treble a little bit. It is more of a colored listen than the HD800S, and I can imagine a lot of diehard fans of that very sort of accurate response maybe aren't going to be as happy with the 820. But at the same time, for me, this is the first headphone in the 800 series that I would consider taking home because of that added richness to the sound. And at the same time, remarkably, I think they've managed to keep it, for a closed headphone, a very open sound. That's the most remarkable thing for me.
So the 800S, the 800S's biggest tweak over the original 800 was trying to get that low end to be a little bit stronger, a little bit thicker, a little bit more warm overall sound signature. And I think for the most part, it did achieve that for a very open design. But the 820, it's a completely different beast. Because of it being closed back, the bass increases again some more. It could be due to the pads.
I would say it's even a bigger step from the 800S to the 820 than it is from the S to the original 800 in terms of that the thickness of that bass response.
Definitely, yeah. It's not only more bass, but it's also a little deeper. It's got a lot more of the sub bass coming through now because of that closed back design. It's up to your subjective opinion which one's the better one.
Yeah.
I think we kind of stand at odds here in a little bit. So Lachlan,
I mean, this is still not quite as much bass as I would love, because for me, even though I know it's not accurate, for me something like Audeze LCD4Z or even a Fostex TH600, that kind of richness of bass, I just love that when it comes in on like electronic tracks, and it just gives you that wonderful visceral feeling. The 820 though is definitely, out of the three headphones, the one that delivers more of that impact, and at the same time I think it delivers it without sounding excessive, number one, and without sounding too closed in.
Definitely, compared to those headphones, it does have a much lighter touch in the bass, but it is warmer and it is different. It's more coloured than the bass you'd find in something like the 800S or the 800. If you're a fan of the thinner but more accurate bass of the 800 or even the bass of the 800S, I feel that the 820 might not be quite up your alley, because it does colour the sound, especially in the low end, in the low mids as well, a fair bit compared to the previous iterations. So it does give you a little bit more of a thump though, but if you're a diehard 800 owner, I'd give it a try first.
In terms of the mid-range,
yes,
I think this is kind of interesting. This is the sort of interesting aspect of it. But
when I went to the 820, one of the first things I noticed about it was the differences in the mid-range. So it actually sounds a lot different to the wider but somewhat recessed mid-range of the 800 and the 800S. So the 820, I feel, brings that mid-range closer, but it changes the timbre of all of the instruments and the vocals. I find the vocals are a little bit more nasally and a little bit, just a touch more sibilant for females especially. That kind of kills sort of the vibe for the 820 for me. Like, this is being a diehard sort of 800S owner, I've preferred the way the mid-range has sort of been laid out with those headphones, and I did enjoy the little bit of bass that I did get from the 820, the boost in the low end, but the mid-range is very different. But Lachlan has a little bit of an extra sort of different story and different take.
Well, it's funny because I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying about the mid-range, in that I do think it sounds a bit more boxed in, a bit more nasal, especially in combination with the treble, response from the 800 versus the 820. It lacks that kind of pristine clarity in the vocals, but at the same time, I don't necessarily mind it, because it's a slightly, I don't want to make it, because it sounds a bit of a pejorative thing to say, but it's slightly more honky in the vocals. That sounds a lot like a lot of the other Japanese tuned cans that I've listened to, where there's a kind of slight nasalness to the female vocals that brings them forward, and that makes them, colors them a little. And it's not as extreme. I wouldn't say this is as extreme as, say, like a Audio Technica or a Fostex or that sort of thing, but it's not a change that I dislike.
Right. Yeah. So it's a different take, and it's a very admirable take. I mean, for like we were saying earlier, for a closed can, it sounds remarkably open. So compared to something like the Audio Technicas that you mentioned earlier, it's actually a little bit closer to something like the timbre of a 800 or an 800S than it is to those headphones. So all these changes that we do see, they're not as drastic as we may be implying.
I think that's one of the things. I mean, even when the first time you heard it, I remember you saying it sounds more or less like an 800S.
Yes.
And then over time, you were kind of like, actually, no, I can see where the differences are. And it's those small differences that change your opinion of it.
Yeah.
I suppose we should talk about the treble, but I feel like we've kind of gone over it with the mid-range.
Yeah.
But
So the treble, it's a little different again from the 800S. You actually get a drop in the high frequencies compared to the 800 and 800S. You don't manage to increase them as you might think, closing all those sounds in. So again, this is an artistic sort of difference. It's more musical certainly, but you do lose a little bit of that detail that the 800S has. You don't have any of the ringing of the 800, so it's definitely very enjoyable, very pleasurable listen. But it does change it from the 800's family before the 820. So again, 800S and 800 owners, listen to it first before giving Sennheiser your money.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's why we set up this store, was because with any of this stuff, it's at the end of the day, it's going to be your ears.
Yeah.
In terms of the treble, I think, look, I still think it has a lot of clarity, especially for a closed can. I'm glad that the treble response is not like it is, say, on the Sony Z1R, which is quite, as much as I like the Z1R, and I've grown to like it more when I listen to it, at the end of the day, I still find the treble quite thin and fatiguing. Whereas this treble, it's got a peak to it, but I find it much easier to kind of get along with. It doesn't have that clarity that the HD800 has, but the trade-off is that this is more forgiving for a lot of the tracks that I listen to.
It's the same story for me, really. I played a bit more on the line for treble. You can certainly say the treble of the 800, the standard 800, was a little high. It was it's a very bright sounding headphone. Obviously not as bright as some of its competitors, like the T1, for instance. But it was definitely a little bit on the brighter side. So to have something like the 800S, which was a more neutral tuning of the headphone, I found it to be just right, I think, for the music I listen to, but just for anything I put through my computer. So it turns out that this is just right for me. And the 820, it loses a little bit of that treble, and I think it's just too little treble for someone who's just kind of had the 800S as sort of like their go-to. So it's a very different experience if you know these two headphones intimately. But compared to something, any other competitors, it's still very minute changes, I think. So
I think the interesting question at the end of the day with this headphone is this headphone targeted, do you think, towards people who want a really high-end closed can, or is it targeted towards owners of the HD800 and the 800S, and they kind of want to progress to something that would be the new flagship?
Right. The 820, I wouldn't say is a better headphone. The 820 is definitely in the same lineup of headphones, just similar to the 600 series, I would say. It's another flavor of the 800 line. If you're looking for a headphone and you're a die-hard HD800 user, but you want to use it in a setting that's crowded or where you can't have open cans, the 820 is the logical choice. It's so similar to the 800S and the 800 that I think that you'd get 99, perhaps even 100% of the same experience with some very, very minute differences in a setting like that. And especially if you're looking for the next high-end closed can and you want something that's a little wider and a bit more detailed than the competition, the 820 is a really good one to start looking at.
Yeah. In terms of the field of closed cans, and there really aren't, compared to open cans, there aren't really that many amazing closed cans out there. And I can say, for a closed headphone, I would say this is one of the best closed headphones, the most open sounding closed headphones that I've heard. But I agree with you completely in that I don't think that this is a better than the HD800S. It just sounds, it sounds different.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks so much, Eric. Let us know what you thought of this format for a video and drop in to have a listen, the 820 with the 800S, and we've even got the original 800, which will soon become, I believe, a sort of collector's item.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for watching, and see ya.
That's good.
Yeah, that was good. I think
like
that went
that.
really
Yeah.
well.